There's a very high probability that these accounting firms are co-conspirators in a criminal conspiracy to defraud the stakeholders, being both the public and the bondholders, and any entity that believes that they're relying on the implicit guarantee of the property owners, AKA the fraud perpetrated by the school districts.
They lied about property taxes. We are on the cusp of making a permanent and lasting change with a real possibility of eliminating property taxes here in the state of Texas. So I would like to say to the politicians, to the House and to the Senate of Texas, please allow Texas to lead the nation to eliminating property taxes. And again, to the politicians, the sooner that you guys come to the table, and you guys have seen the bill, you have seen the amicus that Mitch Wexler has made, the sooner you come to the table to help us with this, the higher odds of you cementing your legacy for centuries to come. Let this be proof positive that a united politicians that care about their constituents can still make a positive and lasting difference in this day and age. You guys, we plead with you, the Senate, the House, take this seriously. Mitch Wexler, what do you got for us today?
Well, this video is really an addendum to the amicus brief. It is about greed, ignorance, envy, and corruption. And every person who buys groceries or pays real estate tax should see this video, because it is their money that ends up paying for all this corruption and inflation, which is putting over 30% plus of the households in harm's way of bankruptcy. That's what we're going to lay out here in this video today.
And on top of that, guys, we're going to expose one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in the world that potentially affects every single person in this world. Now, before we begin, this is a 22-page presentation. Everything is going to be linked in the description. Don't forget as well, things are linked in our Teachable account. But I'd like to say this. We've been getting a lot of comments that, hey, if you eliminate property taxes, then who's going to pay for the schools? Or if you eliminate property taxes, home values are going to explode. Here's the thing, you guys, before we talk about the other end of this, we need you guys to acknowledge the fact that they are committing fraud. Okay, so I need you to say out loud, they are committing fraud and stripping me of my equity illegally. Once you guys acknowledge that, we can start working on this together and build a better future. But step one, you have to first acknowledge the fraud, and the politicians need to step up. So I will be throwing up their names as Mitch Wexler gives his presentation. Mitch Wexler, good luck, sir.
This is the preamble just to set the stage so everybody understands what's going on throughout this video, because there's a lot at play here. There are 9 documents as part of this presentation, and they appear below the video, which include the amicus brief and its associated bill. One of the documents is the school district financial report, which can be substituted for any school district's financial report. And the financial report requirements from the Texas Education Agency, which can be substituted for any state agency, and the Government Accounting Standards Board. Throughout this series of videos and documents, I have constantly asked for anyone to help show us if anything is wrong in our context or our analysis. As no one can disprove the context or what has been shown in the amicus brief and the resulting school district fraud and the balance sheet analysis, you must accept the contents as true. Given that it is true, then you are a person of knowledge, and you, each legislator, has the power to prevent a wrong, which is a requirement under the Texas Penal Code 7.01, being intentionally fail to report criminal activity, and Title 42 U.S. Code Section 1986, being knowledge of wrongful act and power to prevent. This is where we are today. To right a horrible, expensive, ill-conceived wrong. Emotion and ego equals bad decision-making. Trying to constantly fix something you don't understand is the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Today, we are going to explain what happened, recognize it, show the solution, and tie it all back to the amicus brief and the associated bill. I've done the math, due diligence, analysis, blood, sweat, and tears over these documents so that we, my accountant and I, could explain, and Travis Spencer through these videos could show you what has happened in the most efficient manner possible. We tied the math to USPAP, that's Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, to the Texas Property Tax Code, to the Texas Constitution, to the Constitution of the United States of America. As shown in the amicus brief, the net result of what has taken place are also violations of the U.S. Constitution, being the First, Fifth, 14th, and 16th Amendments, as well as the state of Texas violating Article 6, Clause 2, which is the sovereignty clause of the U.S. Constitution, which clearly states federal law trumps, yes, pun intended, state law. The direct quote of Article 6, Clause 2, this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary, notwithstanding. What that really means is U.S. Supreme Court law, federal law, trumps state law. A vote against repealing the real estate tax in favor of the uniform sales tax is literally a vote against your family, friends, neighbors, constituents, and society. Analyze, decide, implement, be accountable.
In other words, to the politicians that have reviewed the amicus, that have reviewed the bill, you have to act. It's literally your legal requirement, now that you understand the fraud, to do something about it. Now, as Mitch is going through this next part, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an overlay of all of the members of the House and Senate in Texas. And if you live in Texas and you want to make a difference, what I would strongly encourage you to do is reach out to whoever is your representative in your district. And you guys, again, we need your help here. Send the amicus, the bill, and this presentation to your politicians, so we corner them in a way to make them react. And here's the thing, some of them just don't understand what's going on, but want to make a difference. You guys, this is the difference. This is the truth. This is the math. This is what we need. So pay attention to who you elected and call them and get this information to them. Mitch Wexler, please, sir, carry on.
School district fraud, the balance sheet and its analysis. What we're doing here is we're using a simple balance sheet for the purpose of exposing the fraud as to who did it, why it was done, and what the solution is. The business of schooling has failed. Homeowner equity has been stripped and diverted. One of the points that's very important throughout this entire presentation is recognize that everything we're talking about is applicable to all states in the union, including Texas. This analysis is in furtherance to the amicus brief and the associated bill, and there's a live link inside of this document below where I'm speaking. The objectives of this document are to show mom and pop how their money is being stolen and equity stripped. B, show the Texas Senate and House of Representatives how their personal money and that of their citizens or constituents is being stolen. C, show President Trump why the Department of Education should be shut down. D, deliver more proof positive to the Texas legislators why the real estate tax must be repealed in favor of a uniform state sales tax per the amicus brief and the associated bill. How are we going to do this? Well, we're going to do this via 1, discuss the purpose of the balance sheet. 2, illustrate the format and the structure of the balance sheet. 3, outline some issues relating to valuing assets. 4, show the difference between a cost basis and market basis balance sheet. 5, define owner equity and net worth. 6, analyze a firm's, in this case, school districts, solvency and liquidity. 7, introduce the statement of owner equity, your money. 8, we have a summary of letters that have been delivered to the executive branch of the state of Texas. 9, summary 2, showing and explaining the school district fraud. The balance sheet is applicable to everybody, everywhere, including all states and government entities. The balance sheet summarizes the financial condition of a business at a point in time. It is a snapshot. It estimates net worth or owner equity. Most transactions affect the balance sheet, so it may change daily, and we'll come back to that point about changing things daily. Everything owned and owed by a business or individual at a given point in time is included in the balance sheet. Assets, anything of value owned. Liabilities, any debt or other financial obligation owed to someone else. Owner equity or net worth, the amount the owner, which in this case is taxpayers, has invested in the business, and the business are schools. Balance theory, owner equity equals assets minus liabilities. Preparing a balance sheet. Most are prepared at the end of the accounting period. However, today's software allows instant updating. Comparing prior year or comparing a prior time frame to a current year or a current time frame. A proper analysis will show percent change, time frame to time frame. Accounting standards must be applied. That's the law. False, misleading, omission, illegal or unethical conduct or activity is prohibited by law. Fraud prevention and deterrence is paramount. We'll come back to that, but I have in brackets here, certified fraud examiner. What's important to note here, no school district that we know of has hired a certified fraud examiner. No school district that we know of has provided 1, proper notes to a balance sheet, 2, bond schedule, 3, sources and uses as part of their financial report.
Bit of a spoiler alert. We're now going to go into what the pensions, the school pensions, are allowed to invest in. And this is going to absolutely blow you away. And also another spoiler alert. What I found out through this presentation is I pay the Department of Education or just education. I have 3 different taxes essentially on that, you guys. Number 1, my personal income tax from the federal government goes towards education. My property taxes locally goes towards education, which is almost as much as my income tax expenses. And on top of that, I take my private money that has already been taxed and I have my children go to private school. You guys, I've calculated that 25% of my gross income goes towards education. Think about that when Mitch goes into this next part about the high risk investment for teacher pensions.
Now, don't everybody freak out because yes, this looks a little difficult. Yes, this is going to be a little bit difficult to get through, but it's imperative because what you're going to see towards the bottom of this is just mind-numbing. So the key issues, the Texas Education Agency, paragraph 1.114 and paragraph 1.117, this document will appear below this video so you can read it on your own. However, the annual financial report for the Itasca School District appears below this document and below this video. Itasca is another poster child for violating state and federal accounting standards. So what we're talking about here are the accounting standards which are required by law, which are violated. 1.14, the audit requirement on page 14 of the Texas Education Agency Financial Accounting System Resources Guide says, an independent auditor must audit your district's financial accounts annually. The district must file the auditor's report with the TEA electronically as part of its AFR. For more information, see 1.5 required reports and data submission. Okay, is an audit an audit? Apparently, it depends on who's cooking the books. The mantra of the accounting firms is we are looking at and reporting upon what we were given. This is not an audit, nor is this a statement of a get out of jail free card. There's a very high probability that these accounting firms are co-conspirators in a criminal conspiracy to defraud the stakeholders, being both the public and the bondholders, and any entity that believes that they're relying on the implicit guarantee of the property owners, AKA the fraud perpetrated by the school districts. 1.1.7, investment of public funds. Public funds investments for school districts is governed by the Public Funds Investment Act, PFIA, Texas Government Code, Chapter 2256, which specifies investment policy and allowable investments for school districts. And it talks about GASB, which is the federal government. Those are the standards with which the financial institutions have to comply. and it includes reverse repurchase agreements. That's something fairly sophisticated, but you'll see where this is going in a minute. It requires disclosures of legal and contractual provisions that govern the district's deposits and investments. They are required specifically to spell this out. GASB Statement 79, certain external investment pools and pool participants. You must spell this out. GASB establishes accounting and financial reporting standards for U.S. state and local governments that follow GAAP, generally accepted accounting practices. The Government Accounting Research System, GARS, provides access to those standards. Here's the big kahuna. Types of investments that these entities, your school district, are allowed to invest in. The PFIA, Public Funds Investment Act, authorizes the following investments in the sections noted. Obligations of or guaranteed by government entities. We'll come back to that guaranteed stuff shortly. Certificates of deposits and share certificates. Repurchase agreements. Securities lending programs. Bankers' acceptances. Commercial paper. Mutual funds. Guaranteed investment contracts. Investment pools. The point of that one section is this is a type of second Social Security fund using your tax dollars. You make an income, you pay into a Social Security system. When you get old, allegedly, there's going to be money there for you from which to withdraw some Social Security funds. Same thing applies for everybody that's participating in this. That's one Social Security fund. What you're seeing here is, in fact, another second Social Security fund that's below the line. You can't see it. You try and dig down and find out who's getting this, and that's what we're going to explain to you in a minute. This is not about educating children. This is about pensions. When you look at that investment pools, they're taking your money, sticking it into a side account, and then creating an investment vehicle. Where does the money come from to invest in public funds? It's your money. Tax, real estate market value to assessed value, plus tax, which is fraud on market values, created to cover the spending by the school districts, plus another tax on inflated market values, plus income tax as the state received federal funds from the federal system to go into the schools, plus inflation, which is another hidden tax due to the interest and financial risk of the government overspending and waste, plus tax on the sold goods, plus another tax, which is the tax on inflation on the sold goods, equals tax on inflation and tax fraud that they created. You understand how many levels of tax and fraud on the tax are going on here? Would you trust a school district with your money to invest your public funds? Think that one through. Who gets benefit of these public funds? Do you actually think that the school teachers themselves know anything about what's going on here, that they've got the ability to put their hands on a single document that says, hey, yeah, my fund made X amount of dollars today? Do you think that that same school district teacher even bother to analyze, well, I'm getting paid, but how is it that I'm getting this money into this fund? The answer is straight up fraud. Would you trust GASB? That's the government. That's the federal government that says you have to do these things so that it's auditable. Would you trust them? This is the Government Accounting Standards Board. Where are the true audits? Did GASB audit the school districts or the state to see that they're in compliance? No, there's not a stitch of documentation out there. Not a single certified fraud examiner has been hired to look into any of this. Now you have to ask the ultimate question, why? And by the way, that's a live link to the GASB website.
Just to reiterate what you just said, and this is something that blew me away, essentially somebody, who knows who, is allowed to take the teacher pensions and invest in things like repo, repurchase contracts, security lending, commercial mortgage-backed securities. We know what's going on in the commercial sector. There's no real audit. The current auditing is an absolute smokescreen. It's starting to become more and more obvious that this whole situation with the Department of Education is not about children, like you said. It's about pensions and it's about the stock market. Now, I want to show the viewers real quick, Mitch, the propaganda that they're playing with our children. And I also want to acknowledge that, hey, guys, without the pensions from teachers, the stock market wouldn't be at all-time highs. Think about that. I want to show you guys the bond guarantee program through Texas, which you guys have about $255 billion worth. And what I want to point out is, again, the propaganda on how they're making us vote yes on this. And I'm hoping to waken up people up. Look at what they're doing. They're using our children to commit the fraud. A minority children saying, thank you, Texas. Thank you for this classroom, when really they don't need $255 billion or any billions of dollars to support these children. They just need good and honest teachers. That's it, with hopefully a community that can afford to live there, including the teachers. Mitch, let's move on to page 5, and I'm going to attempt for the viewers to read how pensions are supposed to be calculated. And when I'm reading this, I want you guys to understand a normal teacher or a normal person is supposed to understand this. Listen to this. Pension expense is calculated by completing the following steps. Okay, you guys ready? Use total pension expense as provided by the TRS and the current year expensing of pension expense, which is calculated by the school district to calculate the grand total pension expense to the school district. That's crazy. See exhibits 1 point blah, 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 blah. And the current year amortization from the prior year's deferred outflows of resources. The amortization amounts come from the deferred outflows of resources table maintained by your school district. Who's maintaining these tables? I don't think anyone is. Subtract the current year amortization from prior year's deferred inflows of resources. The amortization amount comes from the deferred inflow of resources table maintained by your school district. The deferred outflows cannot be netted against the deferred inflows of resources on the tables maintained by your school district or your bookkeeping system or in your financial statements. The result is pension expense that will be recognized by school district. To me, it's like, how much wood does a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood, Mitch? It's absolutely confusing. And thank you for allowing me to read that very interesting little part there, Mitch. Please, sir, continue.
The point to what Travis just read, and although I'm laughing because it's sad, think this through. Who in the world could possibly follow this? And we're going to touch on that issue. It's called the rule of law. We're going to touch on that shortly. But in the meantime, everything that Travis just read is making the point that it is intentionally as clear as mud. It's being done intentionally. So just on the idea of a little bit of cleanup, because we've gone through a fair amount here so far, those bonds that Travis had referenced, that's $255 billion worth of mortgage guaranteed bonds. In other words, what the side of our state government is doing, they have what's called a guaranteed bond program totaling $255 billion. Well, allegedly, that money would be used if a school defaults on its bonds. However, there's a high probability that if a school defaults on its bonds, this sovereign wealth fund, which is a part of the state of Texas, will come out unscathed. In other words, here's another illusion. So as we keep going, what is it that we've learned in this very short period of time so far? We've learned that there are no proper notes to the balance sheet. What are the pension liabilities? What are the total liabilities? And we're using this balance sheet throughout this presentation as the backbone to explain how this fraud is being committed. We've learned that there are no bond schedules. We've learned that there are no sources and uses. We've learned that there's no uniformity and application of accounting practices across school districts. That's the state, GASB, GARS, GAP, PFIA, TGC, HHSC. We've learned that there's no uniformity and application of independent accountants between the school districts. Every school district hires another accounting firm, and another accounting firm comes up with a completely different submission to the state comptroller's office. That's not right. No uniformity of tracking school district financial reports at the state comptroller's office. A school district can take your public funds and invest them for what purpose and whose benefit. And those are really key issues. For what purpose and to whose benefit, as in who's running the fund. Plus, the manipulation of pension fund income and expenses in the reports. When you try to drill down, good luck. Equals Annual financial reports are meaningless and created to paint a narrative requiring continuous real estate taxpayer funding, plus, and this is another big kahuna, plus federal funding. These local school districts have their hand out for federal funding that goes to them through the federal government, and the monkey in the middle is the state of Texas. They got $19 billion on a school system that was effectively shut down for COVID. See the 2024 annual funds report. And that is the slippage in the system. I'm using the word slippage, which is fat, overhead, fraud, graft, greed, corruption, call it whatever you want. That's slippage to the point where 85 cents on every dollar is going to pay for this corruption. So 15 cents roughly hits the target. How exactly does all this hidden information conform to GAAP, generally accepted accounting practices? And the answer is it doesn't. So again, we're going to use the balance sheet. So by the time everybody that's done looking at this video, you will know more about a balance sheet than these accountants who are filing these reports with the state of Texas.
This next part of this video should rock your soul because it's about to show you, again, you guys, that 85 cents of the dollar used to the Department of Education essentially goes towards fraud. Think about what we're saying and sit down for this next part. This is specifically talking about federal dollars being pushed into Texas education. Is that correct?
Yes.
So on top of the property taxes, the school systems are also getting our federal income tax. Continue, please.
Right. So what this is showing, this is from the state of Texas website, and they are capable, right? The state of Texas is capable of getting to the information. The problem is what's being hidden under the hood, and we'll get there in a minute. And we're about to see here that there's actual discrepancies even in these charts. But let's leave the discrepancies aside because it's not the point. The point is that federal dollars totaling $321 billion are coming in. This is from the federal government. This is your income taxes that go to the federal government that get rerouted back to the state of Texas, that get rerouted back into, as we're talking here about the school districts. And I guess it goes to other sources, and you can see where that is. However, it's not what you're seeing on the surface of this graph. It's what's going on under the surface of this graph, which is not traceable. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. So let's leave this graph just for a second. I want to go to the right-hand side of this. House Bill number 1, that's current, 2024, $17.6 billion for property tax relief. Now let's think about that for a second. You're spending money, you've got a system, everybody's complaining about it for obvious reasons. You wouldn't need the tax relief if the fraud wasn't being committed in the first place. So then we go down this list on the bottom right-hand side. Do you know about this? Do you know that there's $500 million this year for studying curriculum? Really? And how many years of this curriculum has existed? Why do you need $500 million this year? $500 million for school choice? Do you know about this? Do you know about $300 million for school safety? Do you know about $49.4 million for virtual education? The budget also includes $5 billion for a supplemental check as a cost of living adjustment. Okay? That's $5 billion for cost of living on top of the second social security system that they've already got in a fund that most of the viewers that are watching this video haven't got a clue that exists. So you see, it's the buckets of money that are being sidelined, used for nefarious purposes. And that's what this is. You've got departments in here. There's a document below this video that outlines 2 pages. I think it's pages 29 through 31 of every ABC, NBC, XYZ entity that are associated with what we're looking at on these 2 charts. 2 pages of these entities, none of which has an effect on your life on a daily basis. So one must ask, why do these entities exist? Who's getting benefit of these entities, and why in the world are the real estate taxpayers paying for this? And by the way, that issue about the federal government spending money here, you have to realize that the school districts themselves submit line items to the federal government that says, well, we've got X amount of minority students, pay us. Who's auditing that? Therefore, the federal government themselves is subject to the fraud that's being committed here. So now, over and above the 321 billion, right, coming from the feds, add in 86 billion coming from the local taxing entities.
Understand what Mitch just said. This is federal dollars going to Texas, of which, just looking at this pie, not even what Mitch just went over in detail, this is $122 billion, Article 3, agencies of education. $122 billion of federal funds goes towards the education in Texas. And that's on top of the, $86 billion in property taxes, of which 83% of that 86 billion goes towards education. That's a bunch of my property taxes going to education. And I spend over $1,500 a month to keep my kids in a private school. It seems now like all of my money, Mitch, or a lot, an overwhelming amount of my money is going towards funding this fraud.
So clearly, Texas has a spending problem and a resulting fraud problem. So what we're seeing here over in the left-hand column, upper left, those are the dollar amounts that are being spent. Okay, now we'll get to the spending item in a minute to show a bit of an issue there. However, generally speaking, that's what's being spent to those entities, totaling 377 billion. Okay, now that's your 377 billion being spent. There's your 86 billion. See, it's in red with an arrow, just so you can get there quickly. Okay, that's your 86 billion in taxes. But when you start looking at how much that's been climbing year by year by year, over the last 5 years, 21.25 trillion was created in real estate overvaluation, from which 450 billion in 2024 was stolen. Then you begin to understand the magnitude of this. So the third element here, which is across the bottom of the screen, your school district, and I don't care where you are, in any state in the union, Canada, in any province, go to your school district and ask them to fill this in. What this is what is the cost to educate a child? Very simple. Fill it in. Now, they're going to tell you they can't do it. Do you think we have a problem here? You can't tell me how much it costs to educate a child in your school? You can't tell me how much it costs to educate a child in your school district, which is nothing more than the amalgamation of every school inside of your school district. Mr. State Comptroller, you can't tell me, with all the lawyers, accountants, interns, everybody you've got in your organization, you can't tell me or anybody on your website how much does it cost to educate a child. In other words, you're not tracking it. Why? It's the most simple, basic element available. Go ahead, everybody, grab the spreadsheet, take it to your school district, please, and ask them to fill it in. Answer the question. Watch the response.
And you guys, that is a direct challenge. He's literally saying, Mitch is asking you to take this general accounting 101. Literally, a child with basic skills can complete this chart. This is not complicated. Accounting 101. We challenge you guys to take this to your school board and have them fill this out and have them accurately tell you how much does it cost per child. They can't do it. It's fraud. This is the biggest Ponzi scheme in the world going on right now that affects literally every single person in the world. The trillions of dollars that are being dumped into the education system right now, it's shocking. Who would have thunk the Ponzi scheme was right behind our children? I don't like this propaganda. Let's look at the gauntlet of fraud.
One other point that Travis just raised, it's not just for you, mom and pop, to take this spreadsheet. This is for you, the politicians across the United States, to take this spreadsheet to your state comptrollers, to your school districts, and you, because you're the politicians, make demand on them because you hold the legal keys to this problem.
I'm going to bring the attention to the viewers right to the operating fund transfers, which is the biggest revenue according to this chart right here. That blue line, you guys see that? This is what Mitch calls slippage and what I'm calling the gauntlet of fraud. Again, that is in the operating fund transfers. You see that right there. Mitch, can you please explain what we're looking at here?
Well, what I did on this slide is I actually put the live link to that particular site. That's up in dead center right there. Yeah. So this is actually a very good website for what it starts out as. In other words, they are able to understand over a period of time how to break this down line by line. The problem is it stops at the graph. You should be able to drill down on any one of these lines and find out who's getting the money, and you can't. And that's the problem with the operating fund transfers. That's just if I did that in my business with a whole bunch of real estate assets, I'd get sued into oblivion. It's called commingling of funds, right? You can't see what's going on. Now, are a lot of these entities existing that shouldn't be existing that are being paid through this? Absolutely. So I'm giving props to the state comptroller for at least getting the concept right. The problem is you should be able to drill down live. The software exists today to drill down live. You literally pick up the phone. I mean, if you think that QuickBooks can't do it, which we verify QuickBooks can do it, but if you don't want to use QuickBooks and you want to use SQL Server or some other entity, fine. You want to call up pick up the phone, call Larry Ellison. Hey, so listen, I got this problem and I want to be able to drill down on these things. I've got the base data, but I need to be able to show what's underneath the hood as to how it stacks. You can't audit any of this stuff, and that's the problem here. So this is the money that's coming in, right? It's 372.5 billion on this system revenue, which is from the Texas State Comptroller. So if we go over to the right-hand side just for a second, these are the state taxes on top of which the real estate taxes, 86 billion, are added, of which approximately 42% of the real estate taxes are fraudulent overvaluation for the purpose of overtaxation, right? So they're driving the revenue stream up in both directions. On the state side, and all those revenues and all those taxes from franchise tax, occupancy taxes, et cetera, plus the 86 billion. There are 8 levels of real estate tax in your milk and 6 in the production of beef. Every level of the production of milk, be it the farm where the cows get milked, and so that's where the farm is, then you've got to go to synthesize the milk, et cetera, Everything's got 8 elements of real estate tax in it. Every layer of tax is manufacturing overhead, is passed on through the cost of the final product to the consumer. So you are paying 8 layers of real estate tax inside of your glass of milk. US inflation, 42% of fraudulent overvaluation would stop by the elimination of the real estate tax, including the sales tax on materials to build the real estate. Think about that. If all those taxes where you live, let's say you're living in an apartment, well, all those taxes that are necessary, not just the operating tax, but the tax on the sale of the goods, are built into that structure that you're living in. If those structures didn't have that tax, you wouldn't be paying it. Inflation wouldn't exist. And the amount of homes that would be available, because there's a housing shortage, wouldn't be a problem. In other words, you and I and everybody that's watching this video, in reality, are paying for the fraud. And it is the fraud that has created the inflation. It is a direct correlation.
I want you guys to pay attention. Without the operating fund transfers, the biggest source of income, according to this, and this is not accurate, obviously, for Texas is federal income. That is the biggest category of income alone. Did anyone know that? So, okay, again, biggest category of income minus the operating fund transfers is federal income. And then we have this whole mysterious operating fund transfers. Again, that is the bulk of the revenue. But let's now look at expenses, and this is really going to flip you on top of your head. Here's the expenditures, and go figure there's an additional operating fund transfer expenditure that exceeds the revenue. Do you guys see this? Do you see this area? This is the gauntlet of fraud. This is the slippage. How can the expenditures for the operating fund transfers exceed the revenue? What's going on here, Mitch? What am I looking at? How is this possible?
Well, let's start off with the fact that a week ago, there was a statement of over $20 billion in cash from reserves, okay, at the state of Texas. Now, what you just saw on the prior page was 371 billion roughly worth of income. And what you're seeing here is 377 billion roughly worth of expenses. Uh-oh, we have a $5 billion gap coming right off the state comptroller's website on 2 pages that were printed literally, I don't know, 2 minutes apart.
Huh.
Okay, so the commingling of the funds, and I understand why they're doing it, because they say, well, it's going to be easier, et cetera, but that's not the point. There's such a thing as rule of law and clarity and conforming to all the accounting methods and accounting standards, which you cannot do because you cannot see it. I can't see it. I guarantee you the state comptroller can't see it. He can't put his hands on a single document that says, I spent X amount of dollars, I authorized the payment of this amount of dollars to XYZ entity over here underneath the state that's associated with the education. There's a whole bunch of them. He can't do it, but he should be able to do it. That's the point of this.
And couldn't QuickBooks do this? Well,
yes.
Actually, Mitch, actually QuickBooks couldn't do it because it wouldn't hide the fraud. So if their goal is to hide the fraud and to create a smokescreen and a gauntlet of fraud, then that's actually working pretty well for them. Wouldn't you agree?
Anybody who understands what they're doing in a corporation, regardless of the size of the corporation, right? Like you could have 300 entities and you could have a consolidated report. No problem with a consolidated report, none whatsoever. The issue is you should be able to drill down automatically and say, where did this money go from this particular line item? It should go all the way down. Where did the money go? Who got it? And what was it spent on in a nanosecond?
Yes. And there should not be $5 billion missing.
They'll say, well, we did it this way or we did the accounting that way. That's not even relevant. That's all hot air. The question is, what happened? I'm not interested in excuses, and I'm quite certain there isn't a single taxpayer after going through this video that's interested in excuses. Just to answer the question, where did the money go and who got it?
The gross negligence equals criminal conspiracy to defraud. And again, you guys, we got $5 billion missing. We got the gauntlet of fraud. We're getting overtaxed on the education system. They're illegally taxing us, overvalued on our property taxes. We need to end property taxes. We need something else in place that's not violating the law and robbing us of generational comfort just to live and success. My grandchildren are being taxed like crazy, and they're not even born yet. Think about that, guys. Mitch, can you please break down once again for the viewers what it is we're looking at now?
So gross negligence, which is what we referred to in a prior video, equals the criminal conspiracy to defraud. How did we get there? Legislators who hire people to write bills, okay, that's the intent, you did that, involving finance, who know nothing about the math of the median household income or the laws, which results in equity stripping of the property owners from which pet projects and selective enforcement are derived, equals gross incompetence, and that equals volatility in the system. And I'm using volatility there as the mathematical formula. B, signing a bill that ignores the laws of the state of Texas and ignores the US laws. You can go and see our violations.pdf for all the laws that are violated, plus the math of the median household income, where approximately 30% plus will lose the roof over their head and or go bankrupt, equals intent, equals gross negligence, equals volatility squared. That's the mathematical formula, equals the California fires and Texas stripping of equity belonging to mom and pop. If A equals B and B equals C, then gross negligence created the criminal conspiracy to defraud. And then the criminal conspiracy to defraud equals the equity stripping. And we're walking through in this section how all that happens. But to cut to the chase, trying not to make this video super long, the effects of every single property owner or what's happening here in the United States and Canada, this is a societal issue. And this falls squarely at the feet of the politicians. Stop the gross negligence and repeal the real estate tax in favor of the uniform states sales tax. Back to the issue, and again, we're using the balance sheet as the framework of this entire presentation. There are assets, current assets, there's non-current assets, total assets. Then there's liabilities. Liabilities are current liabilities, non-current liabilities, total liabilities. And then there's owner equity being your money going into this bankrupt system. Total liabilities and total equity. So let's go through this. Can your school district say that they have an asset that can be sold to generate additional cash? No. Do they have an asset that can be used to produce other goods? No. Can the current assets or goods that have already been produced, can they be sold quickly without disrupting future production activities? No. Current assets are goods that will ordinarily be used within the next year to achieve cash flow. Checking and savings accounts or balances or marketable investments that we now know that they have, and accounts and notes receivable or pensions and investments and inventories. Oh, wait a minute. You got cash in a bank. Okay, you got a pension fund. Hidden from the public, but yeah, it's there. Okay, fine. Well, the answer to that one is yes. But here's the key point. Regardless of the marketable investments that could be seized, or investment pools which could be seized, the liabilities are greater than the current assets. That's the whole point of this. The pensions and the investments only exist as a result of A, real estate taxation, B, fraudulent overvaluation and overtaxation of the real estate, and C, bond fraud. You understand? Those investment pools can only exist with those three elements. The individuals, the superintendents and boards who participated in this scheme could be sued, joint and severally liable, and are clearly violating their oath of office. How do you get shrinking enrollment and shrinking test scores? Well, that doesn't equal demand for increasing taxes, higher bond debt, and more bond fraud. Under the balance sheet, liabilities greater than current assets equals bankruptcy, financially and morally. Back to the balance sheet. Non-current assets. Any asset that is not a current asset, assets that are owned primarily to produce the output that will be sold or to produce revenue, selling non-current assets to generate revenue would affect the firm's ability to produce future income. Oh, that's pretty interesting. What exactly does a school have to sell? Because if they sell anything, they can't produce future income. What's the future income? The children sitting in the seats. Liabilities. An obligation or debt owed to someone else. Liabilities in this case are absolutely massive. When you understand that the law has been twisted and contorted, the liabilities are the system itself. It's the fraud. The liabilities equal the fraud. The current liabilities, financial obligations that will become due and payable within 1 year. That's easy. That's the bond fraud. So we're starting to stack elements of fraud. Substitute the word fraud for liabilities, bingo. The liabilities are greater than the assets. Continuing with the balance sheet, owner equity. The amount of money left for the owner if the assets were sold and all liabilities paid. Yeah, you take an average school, sell off all the assets, knock down the buildings, you got a bunch of land. What's left? Zip all. Because the liabilities are greater than the assets. The net worth of these entities is literally negative. The pensions and the investments only exist, and I'm repeating this because this is crucial. The pensions and the investments only exist as a result of A, real estate taxation, B, fraudulent overvaluation and overtaxation of real estate tax, and C, bond fraud. Bond fraud plus real estate tax is the liability.
Mitch, can you confirm that whoever's backing the bonds, providing the insurance, there's this whole implied immunity thing, right? Implied immunity. Is it true that if fraud is discovered, that this whole immunity or implied immunity goes right out the door? Is that correct?
The idea of implied immunity is complete nonsense, right? And so here's why. At the local real estate tax level, your CADs, it is not discretionary not to adhere to the US Constitution. In other words, you don't have the discretion, right? It is not discretionary not to adhere to uniform standards of professional appraisal practice. You must adhere to USPAP, you must adhere to the US Constitution, you must adhere to the Texas Property Tax Code. All these things are not discretionary. So the idea that anybody can walk away from this and say, well, it's not our problem. No, you're wrong. You are a co-conspirator in a criminal conspiracy to defraud. It is that simple. And by the way, anybody want to debate me on this? Let's go. I've offered multiple times. You can't do it, which is why we're hearing crickets from everybody. It's okay for you to have an opinion that's different than mine. All I'm saying is prove it. Back it up. And the point is, you can't, because when you use this balance sheet, it leads to the irrefutable proof that this system is bankrupt. You're moving money from one pocket to another that the public can't see. You only do that if you're trying to hide the truth. By the way, GASB is real. GAAP is real. Didn't conform to that either. You don't have to go very far. You get 2 or 3 pages into these documents and you begin to realize, oh, crap, this is not discretionary. This is real. And yeah, we're on the hook. One other thing, why do you think it's so difficult to fill a supervisor's role at a school district right now? You're welcome.
Let's go to the intermediate assets, liabilities, and valuation.
Well, you end up with the same thing. We're right back to this balance sheet issue. And as you go through all of this, you see, well, dividing non-current liabilities into 2 categories, intermediate versus liabilities versus intermediate assets. And then you end up with the asset valuation. The point being in all of this is that the liabilities are so much greater than the assets, including, by the way, the pensions. Even if you said, okay, fine, the school district has this pension and has this investment pool, it's minuscule in comparison to the bond fraud. It's minuscule in comparison to the fraud created at the CADs. All of these things are hooked at the hip. They're not using a balance sheet, they're making it up. Why would it be so difficult for anybody simply to use exactly this framework on a balance sheet, which is GAAP, and say, okay, we'll just follow GAAP and we'll track all this down and we'll make it available to the public so the public can see what's going on. You should be able to drill down and say, okay, this check was written from this division of the government, of the state, and it went to this school district to cover this issue. 3 steps. You can't even get the 3 steps done. To the politicians out there, if this isn't pissing you off, you're brain dead, right? You've got to understand, this is your money. This is your politician's personal money that's doing this. Your money is no different than that of a person living in a multifamily with a $60,000 income. You, the politician, and you, that renter, have the exact same fraud being committed on you. The inflation that exists in this system is a result of the fraud. And that is what this is talking about, the asset valuation. What asset valuation?
Seems like QuickBooks would be a very good solution here. Next here, and then I'm going to do a recap when we get to page 16, but this is a balance sheet analysis. What do we got here, Mitch?
Well, this goes on to prove the idea of more fraud. So in a balance sheet, it's used to measure the financial condition of a business. The schools, make no mistake, this is a business. You want to compare that business to other business or compare that school to other schools. That's the purpose of a balance sheet, so you get an idea of what's going on under the hood. However, lenders use balance sheets to make analysis on financial decisions and to monitor the financial progress of their customers. Schools deal with banks, schools deal with the state comptroller. It's an institution that gives the money indirectly. Sometimes they deal with the federal government to get more tax receipts. But did anybody bother doing the analysis that we've done here in this presentation today to get to the truth of the matter and say, hey, fraud's being committed here. What are you doing about it? So what due diligence was done by the bond investors, the bond underwriters, which are the school districts, the lenders, the state comptroller, to determine the overvaluation and resulting overtaxation of the sources of the cash receipts? Huge question. They won't answer it, but that's the key. What due diligence was done that matches the contents of this balance sheet analysis applied to the school districts? What true audits through a certified fraud examiner were done on any entity, the schools themselves, each school, the school districts, the accounting firms, the CAMA software, the CADs, and the comptroller in the chain? What audits were done on any of this by a true certified fraud examiner? Which, by the way, you can take this presentation and hand it to a certified fraud examiner, and then that is their scope of work. Who did the audits? Very interesting. Every school has an accounting firm that they hire and they say this is an audit, yet when you go and read the report from the accounting firm, it says, well, we're not exactly adhering to it and we're submitting this form. Okay, fine. But that form stacks all the way up to the state comptroller's office. So in fact, the state comptroller is taking in data that is fraudulent. It's not real. Why were true audits not conducted by certified fraud examiners all the way down the chain. And this is important because, again, we're back to this balance sheet issue. It measures of liquidity. Current ratio is the total current assets divided by the total current liabilities. Working capital, measures of solvency. Debt divided by asset ratios, your total liabilities divided by total assets. Your equity is divided by the asset ratios, your total equity divided by total assets. That's what's inside of a balance sheet. That's what you use the balance sheet for. Well, Mr. Hagar, State Texas Comptroller, why is it with all the employees, interns, attorneys, and accountants at your disposal, you can't put your hands on the single school district's balance sheet that conforms to any one of those measures of liquidity? Not one. Or a district's consolidated balance sheet, both of which should be available on an operating fund transfers basis. In other words, your line item, that thing should be drillable down 1,000 lines if necessary to get to the truth. And on the bottom of that one form that we saw on that page was the word transparency. Really? What transparency? If you can't answer the debt to equity ratio and you can't put your hand on it, then that's not transparent. And that also means that you, the viewer, who are entitled to that transparency under the rule of law, can't get to it. A, the ability of a school district to generate cash, but for the implicit guarantee of the real estate taxpayers. What is it? Zero. B, the ability to pay off all liabilities of school districts if the assets are sold. What is it? Zero. This is what a balance sheet and financial reports are supposed to do, not create subversion of the law and equity stripping of property owners. The key kahuna, liabilities greater than assets equals bankruptcy.
You've calculated the overvaluation for different types of properties, single family, multi, commercial, industrial properties. Can you explain what this is?
So detecting financial statement fraud, one of the elements is a spike in revenue, right? That means you got to dig in and say, what caused this spike in revenue? There could be fluctuation in financial ratios, which we just described. However, over and above that is something called the rule of law. So we'll break that down in a minute. But when you look at this chart and you go to the bottom, that's highlighted in blue as an example. So single family homes between 2016 and 2024 went up 123% in this Hill County school district, okay? But then as you go across, you start seeing things like, well, qualified ag land went up 243%. Interesting. Farm and ranch improvements went up 219%. 109, 243, 219. Industrial property up 2,400%. So under rule of law, the law must be applied equally to all persons in like circumstances. Everything you're looking at here is a violation of that law, and that ends up in the ultimate definition of what we're talking about here as RICO, because they are not adhering to the law. This one little graph, never mind all the mountain of evidence we've got on our website, this one little graph shows that. So if you drop the screen down just a little bit, what criteria is used from Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, USPAP, and the Texas Property Tax Code and the Texas Constitution under Uniform and Equal to justify this swing in percent values and between property types? The answer is none. Why do we say that? Because we have it on tape. Quote, "You are the masters at guessing," as stated by a board of directors member at Denton Central Appraisal District to Don Spencer, the chief appraiser. This recording is on our website. You are the masters at guessing. That statement says it all. The above spreadsheet confirms disparate values, no uniformity, violations of USPAP, and every appraisal law ever written. The fraud affects even those on their deathbed. That's how bad this is. There's a memory care patient in a 300 square foot unit, and that person is responsible for $1,700 per year in real estate tax. This goes all the way up and down the chain and affects every single person one way or another.
I still can't figure out how Don Spencer, the chief appraiser, still has a job. We have him under audio recording public information, committing fraud. How are how is enforcement allowing this man to continue to operate? But regardless, I want to break down a few points that I got as a normal citizen consumer. Number one, my kids' education and your kids' education, if you have kids, is being used as propaganda to create a fraud system and Ponzi scheme that's probably the biggest in the world. Number two, instead of USPAP and standard deviation to protect us as citizens of the United States of America and Texas, instead of doing that, they're creating a RICO violation. Pensions, specifically school pensions, are screwed right now. Schools are bankrupt, and essentially no due diligence is being done to audit those reports. In fact, instead of due diligence, we should call it fraud diligence, because all it's doing is creating a smokescreen audit. And what's also crazy is, again, these pensions, they're able to be used to purchase high risk investment like repo accounts or, again, commercial mortgage backed securities. This is freaking crazy. And on top of that, remember, I have 3 education expenses. Number one, my income tax. You guys saw federal income goes towards massive amounts of revenue in Texas. Number two, my property taxes, over $12,000 in property taxes, 83% of that goes towards education. I spend nearly $20,000 in addition to those 2 things on private schooling. I'm sick and tired of this fraud. And so again, I say the last thing, my last recap, whoever's watching this, that's a politician of the House or the Senate, you are now a party of knowledge. And if you're a viewer that lives in Texas, again, you have to help us. You must send this presentation, the amicus and the bill to end property taxes, to your House rep and your Senate rep. Mitch, please, sir, continue.
To your point, Travis, I want to make a slight note here. The average return to an entity, one of the biggest in the globe, is called CalPERS. Their average return is only 6% net after fees. Okay? So why go through all these machinations of having all these investment pools and all this nonsense and all the amount of money that's being paid when in fact the people that are really benefiting isn't the teachers? It's those who are getting the fees. It's the slippage, it's the fat, it's the fraud. Get rid of that. Start paying the teachers what they're truly worth. Get the good teachers, get rid of the bad teachers, get the fat out of the system, and now you've got something that's operating efficiently. With all that said, let's move on to the next one. So we talked about, last slide, the rule of law. Well, the rule of law requires measures to ensure adherence to the principles of supremacy of the law, equality before the law, accountability to the law, and fairness in the application of the law, separations of power, participation in decision-making, legal certainty, avoidance of arbitrariness, and procedural and legal transparency. Okay, let's kind of figure out what we've just read and associate that with everything we've gone through in this video. Just to be crystal clear, as any entity in the chain, i.e. the CADs, the school districts, state comptroller, and a host of recipients through the general fund transfers adhering to the rule of law. Do any of them adhere to the rule of law? Let's break it down. 1, measures to ensure adherence to the principles of supremacy of the law. No. Equality before the law? Clearly no. Accountability to the law? The government and private actors are accountable? No. Application of the law? Must be applied equally to all persons in like circumstances? No. Separation of powers? No. Participation in decision-making? No. Did any of you have any knowledge about what we're going through here today? Clearly not. Legal certainty. The means provided for resolving disputes without prohibitive costs or inordinate delay? No. I've had to file lawsuits every single year on this crap. Avoidance of arbitrariness. There's an interesting one. The ARB panels exist for the benefits of the CADs against the citizens. No. Procedural and legal transparency. Are you kidding? With everything we've just gone through here? Find it. No. The law must protect the security of persons and property. Equity stripping means no. The law must be written in a way that it can be understood by ordinary persons in society. No. How do we know that? Because Travis read a paragraph that nobody in their right mind could figure that thing out. So what do we have? 100% of the real estate taxes violates both state and federal laws and ends in RICO. You can't get away from it. Pay your real estate taxes or we'll take the property. Yet you violated every one of those rules of law. And the implicit idea that you can get out of this isn't real.
And that's a bingo. That is a bingo right there. You guys, we need your help. Get this into the hands of the politicians. Doesn't matter what state you're in. Get this into the hands of the politicians. Now we're on number 18. We are wrapping this up. If you want to summarize this, Mitch, this is continued detecting fraud. And again, to the viewers, this is all going to be linked in the description, free for you to pass on. Mitch, sir, when you're ready.
I'll try and summarize this tab real quick. There's such a thing as 313 agreements. And you've seen all these divisions throughout every school district where, well, we have an investment pool. So you can line up all these investment pools and you can line up all these 313 agreements. You can do all these things, say, here's money in, here's money out. But you see, it really comes down to the ability to detect fraud and understand where that money is going. And if you can't trace it down to the dollar, that's how the fraud is committed. And that's what the balance sheet is showing you. You've got large fluctuations in accounts receivable, right? You've got large fluctuations in accounts payable. And you've got the state of Texas in the middle saying, well, we've got this general fund and we're going to move the money around wherever it is that we decide we want to move the money around to whichever pet project we want to make that money go to. Well, congratulations, because that, again, violates every rule of law. That's what this particular page is saying. You can read it, so we don't have to go through all of it.
This is a summary of 3 letters that Jeff Mashburn wrote, and those 3 letters, for the viewers, the entire letters are going to be in the description. Mitch, do you want to summarize those 3 letters and explain, what Jeff is doing, essentially reporting all of this and working with 3-letter agencies?
Well, what Jeff has done is he sent a letter to Governor Abbott, Glenn Hagar, and the Attorney General Paxton, all 3 of which know what it is that we're doing here on this channel with regard to these issues. They're fully aware of it. So Jeff did a summary of what we're doing, plus the information that he's got through fraudulent contracts having to do with HVAC contracts that, as we speak, he's actually in a meeting with the FBI. So you're going over a lot of these issues. So that's what's the summary inside of his letters. And what he's done is he's made a demand that says, okay, here's the facts. What are you going to do about it? And that's what you can see is in a response is expected from this office no later than February 3rd, 2025. Please provide a copy of that information as requested above, no later than the close of business February 3rd. If the office of the state comptroller elects not to comply with this request, please provide a written statement explaining the position of the state comptroller's office. This request and any response will become part of the public record and evidence pertaining to the matters as described above.
Good job.
So in essence, okay, look, guys, you can disagree with anything that we're saying. That's fine, but give us something to back up your mouth. Prove it. And we can't find anything to disprove what it is we've stated. Otherwise, we wouldn't be stating it. So that's a clear shot and a clear comment to the politicians. Members of the House, members of the Senate, stand in my shoes and ask these questions. Why? Because in essence, you are me. I'm a citizen. Even though you're a politician, you are still a citizen. Stand in my shoes and ask the questions. And that's really what the point is that Jeff is making.
And Mitch, can you read that comment you have there, comment by Mitch, Mitchell Vexler in red?
So what I did is I summarized Jeff's summary. So the comment that I made is all previous efforts, being the 313 agreements, all exemptions, including homestead, circuit breaker, veteran, commercial and real estate tax relief, none of which help the real estate taxpayers by the state have been attempts to mask the problems with ad valorem taxes. The funding mechanisms do not work and have resulted in fraud. The school districts have not been held accountable for the cost of education of a single student. No data to support the annual budgets. The statements made to the press to help raise bonds are pure fiction. How can you have school districts with decreasing student population and decreasing enrollment, and yet increasing bond and increasing real estate tax demands? Where is the math? Where is the application of law? Or is it their position, math and law be damned, and we'll just steal it to cover up the Ponzi scheme? To summarize the balance sheet and everything that we've gone through, a balance sheet shows the financial position of a business or personal, which would be in this case your assets, at a point in time. And by the way, you can use a balance sheet in your own life. So everybody should be using it. This is what it does. If proper notes to the balance sheet do not tie to the bond schedule and the sources and uses, and the method of accounting varies from school district to school district, then the financial reports are meaningless, which omission is intent to defraud, and the state of Texas comptroller claims no enforcement and further promotes the property valuation study, then the path to defraud is crystal clear. Did you, the property owner, sign an implicit guarantee to backstop the liabilities created by the boards of the taxing entities which own the school districts? Did you, the property owners, agree to pay undisclosed pension liabilities of the school districts, which said pensions are not detailed in the notes to the financial report? Were any of these issues brought to your attention in the press releases put out by your local school district? When you see a press release and they say, we're going to raise bond money for this, was any of this information that we're talking about here today in that press release? Of course not. Did you, the property owners, believe that those who created and benefit from the fraud should be held personally, jointly, and severally liable for their actions? What tangible evidence does any school district have on the cost to educate a student? Where did the money go from the fraudulent overvaluation of the real estate, resulting in the overtaxation of the property owners? Think of this one for a minute. How much economic destruction in Texas and across the United States has occurred as a result of the theft of real estate taxpayer money that could have and should have been circulating in the economy rather than being diverted into the unaccountable abyss? The answer is trillions. In 2024 alone, approximately $450 billion in overtaxation as a result of the overvaluation of $21.25 trillion in the last 5 years. Now do you understand why repealing the real estate tax in favor of a uniform sales tax is the only viable solution to stop the fraud on the property owners? See the amicus brief and the bill. Those are live links.
Now we're going to go into the part of this video where Mitch is going to ask the politicians specific questions, whether they're a member of the House or the Senate of Texas or New Mexico. It doesn't matter. Pay attention to these questions. Use these questions to ask your own House and Senate representatives. Okay, this is very, very important. He's already made these questions for you. Please, you guys, use them. We have a real shot at ending property taxes with your help. Let's conquer the apathy. Mitch Wexler, as you're reading some of these questions, I'm also going to roll down one more time the list of the House of Representatives and Senate here in Texas.
Questions to be asked of the members of the Texas Senate and the House of Representatives: Attorney General Ken Paxton, Comptroller Glenn Hagar, and Governor Abbott. And as Travis said, this is applicable across the United States. When the state of Texas enacted the current system of ad valorem taxation on personal property, was it the very best choice to fund the operations of government and public education? If the ad valorem taxing method was the best choice, why did the state of Texas pass the Robin Hood plan to move money from one school district to another? If the state of Texas wanted a system that is fair to all and all taxpayers, no matter where they live, why did the state allow for exemptions? Homestead, circuit breaker, VA, ag, none of which have benefited the citizens, and all of which have created a multi-tiered ranking system among the citizens. Do you believe there's a difference of worth and value among taxpayers in Texas? Was the provision to allow Chapter 313 agreements that subsidize big business a big Band-Aid to mask the flaws in the current system of ad valorem taxation on personal property? Do you, the elected politicians, place a higher value, worth on big business than you do on the citizens in the state of Texas? What is the direct connection between the cost of educating a child in Texas and property values? Please explain how enrollment is down, education scores are down, and demand for bonds and taxes are up. Why are the values submitted by the central appraisal districts differ from the local school districts regarding the cost of education per student, such as HCAD or Itasca ISD? Why are the bond payment history, the bond schedule, proper notes to the balance sheet, sources and uses not available from the ISDs, including and not limited to Itasca, Louisville, Denton, Godley, Frisco, Fort Worth, et cetera, et cetera? Why are the board members in a school district with annual operating budgets of $12 million allowed to negotiate contracts with a value of $965 million without any input of the taxpayers or the ability to vote on the matter? What is the criteria to allow a person or any persons of any school district to negotiate a contract or contracts? Did the state tell those who signed an oath at that school district that they are violating multiple laws? Will the state's self-insurance policy, Exhibit B, cover those claims? Why are independent, allegedly independent accounting firms conducting the annual audits, allegedly audits, not held to the statutes and regulations regarding the annual report distributed by the Texas Education Agency, the Financial Accountability System Resources Guide? The standard is not even mentioned in these financial reports. The independent accounting firms use whatever reference they choose without any oversight by the TEA or local school district. Is the state comptroller not the responsible party in law with the authority to audit? How could all of these questions exist if the comptroller had control by virtue of true audits? Are the tax assessor collectors that collect the tax receipts based on the fraudulent overvaluation by the central appraisal districts on behalf of the taxing entities that fund the school budgets not required to validate and certify the submitted budgets of the taxing entities for accuracy before collecting the annual taxes from the taxpayers? There is not a true system of checks and balances. Those are the audits anywhere in the funding system. That's the CADs, the tax assessor collector, the CAMA software, state comptroller, the school district boards, the CAD boards, and including, but not limited to, the school districts themselves. This is the indictment of the entire system created to defraud all property owners, which hurts every single citizen, not just in the state of Texas, but across the United States. This debt-laden group of bad actors is the definition of government for the sake of government and not for the citizens. The evidence is the evidence, including the false certification of the tax roll. Denton County Tax Assessor Collector. We have the evidence. It's on our website. Fraud and corruption is rampant throughout the state regarding property valuations and taxation in every school district. What are you, the legislators, going to do to stop this? Are you, the legislators, ready to take responsibility for failing to act and stop what has been going on for decades in Texas? Are you, the legislators, ready to take responsibility for dozens of school superintendents and school board members being sued for fraud and corruption? The evidence is overwhelming and now irrefutably part of the public record and cannot be denied. Do you know how much a superintendent gets paid to commit fraud on the taxpayers via no bond schedule, no sources and uses, no proper notes to the balance sheet, and no uniformity of accounting standards? You, individually and collectively, the legislators, owe the answers to these questions to your constituents and the citizens of Texas, as well as the citizens of the United States, given that federal funds are also injected fraudulently into the school districts. If you think these questions are tough, there's 68 pages of questions already prepared for the deposition of Mr. Don Spencer, the chief appraiser of the Denton Central Appraisal District, and if necessary, Mr. Glenn Hagar, the state comptroller, both of which tie the fraud at the central appraisal districts to the fraud at the school districts. The evidence for that is on our website, mockingbirdproperties.com/DCAT. There are articles, videos, testimony, depositions, audio, and government documents. The business of schooling has failed, and along with it, 30% plus of the households are facing bankruptcy and or will lose the roof over their head. And this is happening on your watch, right in front of you. How much money would be circulating in the economy but for this fraud? How many lives would not have been ruined but for this fraud? Attempting a kick the can down the road mentality will fail. The math in the amicus is true. The associated bill with the amicus is true. This document, this presentation, and this video are true. The only question, are you true to the citizens of the state of Texas? I sincerely hope the unequivocal and uniform answer is yes. You, the Senate and the House, have the power to make serious change and fix this. Please do so. Repeal the real estate tax in favor of a uniform state sales tax and fix this fraudulent mess once and for all. Consider yourself a party of knowledge. The solution to the fraud is the amicus brief and the associated bill. We stand ready, willing, and able to help.